Welcome back to another video, guys. Till now we had a brief idea about HTML, CSS, Bootstrap, then we learned about PHP, then we learned about how PHP and MySQL works. Now we are here and we are trying to implement something called as student sign up. Now student wants to create an account and he wants to sign up to our platform. So how are we gonna do that? So we are gonna use something called an API for that. So basically I'll go to Figma so that I can explain you guys what basically an API is. So API now in web technology, like most commonly used words are uh, like client and server. So client server. Even I myself keep saying that server is this, there is server, this happens on the server side. So basically, what is happening? So what is client? What is server? For that, I'll head you over to a next page, and here I'll simply draw an entity. So I'll just call this entity as, let us say, server. This might not be visible, so I'll just increase the font size to 20 something big. Okay, so basically this is our server, and I'll create another similar figure. I'll call it our client. Cool. So this is the server, this is the client. So basically what an API is: application programming interface. And API stands for application programming interface, API. So what API means, these two systems are there which need to communicate with one another. So what client will do is client will simply say send a request to our server, which we call as the API call. So let me just write it. So client will call the server and the server will respond with a response which might be in XML, JSON, in or in other formats. So we'll say that it is the response. So pretty simple, guys. Client will call the server, API call, and the server will respond to the client. So yeah, now what API call is basically a get request, and some of the data is also passed. So get request along with some data like the location, the Mumbai, or things like that. The API can also support other protocols such as post or put or anything else, and we can implement that as well. So API call is done over, all these are basically HTTP methods, and some data, some payload is also passed to the server. Now server will create a response and it will send back to the client. Now it is up to client how to handle it. So this API call is done using JavaScript, and easier way of making those API calls is provided by jQuery. So JavaScript will make this call and server will respond. And again, it is the job of JS to read what the server has responded with and modify the UI accordingly so that the user understands whether my account has been created or not. So this is the basic of what we call as API. So now let us do one thing. On submission of this form, the API should be called, right? So for that, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna head over to student and signup.html. As you can see here, now I have this form. So I'll just say again, I also need, so I have included Bootstrap. I also need JavaScript for this, and the Bootstrap jQuery libraries. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna include these jQuery libraries as well. So jQuery and Bootstrap, here you go in the sign up form. Now that we have jQuery and Bootstrap, I can go ahead in our script tag. I'll just create a new script tag, and to see whether everything is initialized or not, what I can do is I can basically do console.log I am working. Oops, I am working. So if you go over here, if you refresh the page, Okay, so what I did is student signup.html and in script console.log I am working. So this should have, okay, so yeah, here we have in our console. So the console is working. So basically what we want is whenever this form is submitted, an Ajax request has to be sent. So Ajax request has to be sent asynchronous JavaScript and XML. An Ajax request is sent to the server to create this account and server will respond whether the account is created or not. So yeah, so basically what we have to do is on submission of this form we have to capture. So basically this is an event. We are moving on simply to the JavaScript side. So I'll use the jQuery dollar syntax here. I'll say create student account, which is basically ID of the form. Create student account, and this form is signing and its ID is create student account. So I'll say that on submit, call this function and let me call this event as EVT or anything else. So we have this event over here, guys. So whenever this form is submitted, uh, we have a function called event and I'll just say console.log and I'll say user has tried to submit the form. So I'll just refresh this and I'll click over here. What is happening is our JavaScript isn't being called. So I've entered some dummy passwords and as you can see the text appeared there and it disappeared in a while because the page got refreshed, which is happening because the page will refresh whenever a form is submitted. So the first thing that we have to do before everything else is to prevent default. So we do that by evt.prevent default. Now what will happen is the default refresh behavior will be disabled and whenever I submit the form, let us say with some fake credentials for the sake of example, and now if I submit it, the page did not refresh and we got that user has tried to submit the form. So the first thing that we're gonna need is the values of all these things. So first of all, let us say name. So we have this input name, input email, input password, and confirm password. So after I prevent default, I'm gonna go over here. I'm gonna write const uh, input name, or I can say student name is equal to what I'm gonna do. Student name is equal to I'm gonna say the input name, sorry, the element with ID input name. I'll take its value and that will be the value of my student name. So instead of user has tried to submit the form, I'll just output student name and see if it runs properly the way we want it. Okay, so I have by mistake said that the type of this is email, so this should be text. Sorry guys, my bad. So yeah, if I keep going on entering, so as you can see whatever the value was here, we are getting that value in our constant in our variable name, student name. So similarly what we have to do the same for like email address as well. Who so student email is equal to input email dot val and the password will be input password. So there has to be some kind of validation where we check whether the given two passwords match or not. So I'll just leave it there as it is as some to do for you guys, and you guys can actually try and implement how to check the confirm password and password fields are same or not. So now I have all those three things. What is left is to call an Ajax. So before that, I'll just quickly log everything to see whether I'm getting all these values or not. Okay, so yeah, I'll just say name Ajinkya @example.com 1234 and 1234. So as you can see, Ajinkya @example.com and my password. So everything I have received over here. So we are good to go. So the next thing that we are gonna do is actually try and make an Ajax call. So which is Ajax. Now I'll have to have some kind of settings over here which are like URL. So the first setting will be what is the URL. I'll just format it quickly, and yeah, so I can say that const a API call. For the sake of understanding, I can say const API call is equal to Ajax. So first thing that we are gonna say is the URL, which is basically API slash what we can say, create student account dot php. Then we are gonna say the type of this request is post, and the data that we are sending again would be, so the first data that we are sending is student name uh, is equal to student. So basically this is a key value pair. Student name will be student name, student email will be student email, and student password will be student password. Yeah, so what we are basically doing is we are calling this particular API. So this is the endpoint that we were talking about. So if I copy this and if I go to Figma and if I paste it here, so basically this is our server endpoint, API endpoint, where the API is going to be called. API slash create student, and who is calling? Ajax is calling. So yeah, so yeah, again now again, so what we can do is now once API call, which is our Ajax request, is done, we can say execute this function with the response received. I'll say response, and then I can say, I'll basically say first of all console log. I'll say API call successful, find the details below, and then I'm gonna do console.log the response that we received. Fine. Again, we have another method. In this case, the API call fails. So I can do API call dot fail, which is again execute this function with the response, and the function would basically be again the same thing. So I'll just copy from this done, and I'll say API call failed, find the details below. Again we have third method on API call. API call basically which is always, so always will be the one which will be executed regardless your what I can say, regardless your API calls fails or run successfully. So I'll say response, and I'll say console.log I am executed anyways. So if it is something that you have, like if you have to do some cleanup or some things like that, you can do it in the always section. So this is it guys, this is our form, and let us see what happens if I actually try and send an API request on creating an account. So if I show Ajinkya example.com again 1234. So API call failed, find the details below. So why API call is failing is because we actually do not have any API written on the URL that we have mentioned here. So this URL does not exist. So what we can do is we can actually create a new folder and I'll call it as API, and in it I can create a file which says create student account.php. In this again, what we can do is we can actually create a sample class. So I'll just say api.php, and I'll declare a class in this where we write php, and I can say class API. Now class API will basically have a function, public function send response, which will send the response, and so this basically will take a response variable. I'll say response and public function response, and response would basically do some things. It will set the headers correct. So for that we can use header, and we can say content type is application slash JSON, because we're gonna return some JSON. Then what we are gonna do is we're gonna say echo JSON underscore encode, and then we are gonna say encode the response in JSON format, and then we are gonna send it. So basically this is how we do it. We can also add like encoding as UTF-8. So we now have our headers that the given data will be a JSON, and then we echo a JSON. So this is basically a simple API class, nothing complex. So now we have our create student account API. In this we'll create PHP. I'll just require once, and or require, I'll say I want api.php. After that I'll create another class. I'll say class create student account, and so the first thing this class will have is some private variable. So private student name, then we'll have private student email, then we'll have private again, what was it, student password or password, student password I guess. So yeah, we'll have these three variables, and now what we are gonna do is we are gonna create another public method. So I can say, and I'll do one thing, I'll create another thing called as a private dollar response. Okay, so this is the response that we'll send, and we have another method where we call as public function create account. Okay, so this function will be called create account, and the task of this function will be to create an account. So for the time being, what we are gonna do is we are gonna return or we are gonna call let us say create a fake response. So in order to create the response, we'll just use this function to access the response variable of this class, and I'll set the response as an array, and I'll say that status is true. So I didn't do anything with the data that arrived. I just said that response is equal to array status true. And now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna call the method send response. Okay, so what was the method that I created? Send response. Acha, it is not coming over here because we have not extended the class. So this is basically create student account is just API, so it will extend the API class. And now I can do is send response, and I can send this response. So some of you people might not have understood it. So what basically we are doing is we are creating a parent class which will have a default method of sending response as JSON, and we'll have a child class, say create student API, which will extend the API class. We'll have a response, and then what we're gonna do is call this create account function. So whenever this API is called, we'll say that new student is equal to, or we can, it will be confusing to read, so we can do student is equal to new create student account. So this will be a object of create student account class, and then what we are gonna do is we are gonna call this create account method, so student, and then we are gonna call create account. So fair enough. Whenever this API will be called, a new object of student create account class will be created, or I can simply say student account instead of create student account. So student is equal to new student account. Now student will be calling this particular create account using the arrow operator, and let us see what happens when we actually send a request over here. So I'll refresh this page, I'll fill in some details, and API call has failed. A create student account.php not found. So why is this happening, may I ask? So yeah, because we have provided the wrong path, so which is basically outside the student. Uh, so we just exited dot dot slash, so we are in the project directory, and then we are entering the API directory. So if I refresh this, if I go to Ajinkya, and I have created, so API call successful, please find the details below. So the response that we set here has been received successfully. So yeah, so we have sending all this data as well, so we are not getting any data. So what we can do is, so the first thing is we can do one thing now. Now that we have our variables, what we'll do is we'll create a constructor. I'll say public function construct. There we have it. We want nothing, and what we can do is actually will require another thing, which is our database. So database will be there in database slash dbconnect.php. Now we are gonna be using database connect class, and we now have this, and what we're gonna do is we're gonna create a new object. So I can say that we'll have another thing called private, and I'll set it to db, meaning database. Now what we'll do is we'll say database is equal to new database. Sorry. So what we are doing is whenever object of student account class will be created, we'll also create an object of database class. Why so? Because we're gonna need that so that we can, insert the new database in, like insert the new record into our database. So now we have our construct function. We have created an initialized database function, sorry, a database object. Now what we are gonna do is when we have this create account, we'll say now we have our post variable or get variable. So let us say we'll just say request. So I'll say dollar this, or we can initialize this in constructor as well, so it will be semantically organized. The next thing I'm gonna do is say this student name is equal to dollar underscore request, and whatever name we passed over here in our file, this will be the name. So student name, right? So student name over here. Now same we have to follow two times, which is like student email and student password, and in it we have student email and we have the student password. So yeah, we are initializing all these variables, while we create the object of this new class. So basically what is gonna happen is when we create account, what we'll do is we'll say that, so first of all I'll initialize this response to false. Response is equal to false. Okay, so now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna say create account. We have to insert, right? So I'll just say $SQL is equal to insert into. Now what is the table? So we have not created the table yet. So let us go back to PHP my admin and create a database table for storing the account details. So guys, in order to insert the students detail to a database, we're gonna need a database where we maintain all the records for students. Then we're also gonna need the similar database for faculties as well. Then we're gonna need the database for storing the internships as well. And then we're gonna need another like table to store the internship applications as well. So for the time being, we'll end this video here. In the next video, we're gonna see how to design our database for this application, and then we're gonna create our database, and then we're gonna proceed with inserting the new account using the API. So thank you for watching this video, guys. Please do subscribe to our channel if you like the content. If you have any issues, you can drop your issues down in the comment section. If you join our little WhatsApp community, and the link will be given in the description box as well. So thank you for watching, guys. See you in the next one.